I think the future is beyond leadership. I think what leaders have to do is give up leadership. Um, Jeremy Rifkin's newest book, Zero Marginal Cost, makes a very strong argument. Again, it seems to me non-controversial. We're in a knowledge revolution. We're in the digital revolution, and he makes the argument that these social economic revolutions occur when there are profound changes in our sources of energy. And he makes the case that solar and wind them right now are on a Moore's law trajectory. So, for instance, Germany, 23% of Germany's energy comes from solar and wind, and it'll be 35 by in another 5 years. It's not if we'll get cheap, abundant energy; it's when. And the thing about solar and wind that's radically different is that it's a model of distributed energy production and consumption. It's not a centralized grid coming, and I think that's the paradigm that the internet is bringing us. This is the paradigm of the new currencies, of the Bitcoin protocol. Distributed, it's a moving from a centralized hierarchical paradigm to a paradigm of distribution and participation. So there's the Internet of Things, which is coming on board, which will transform the physical world into sort of like a gaming platform. The amounts, our digital trails, will be everywhere. So Cisco says that there's about 13 to 15 billion things on the internet today. It'll be 20 billion, 50 billion by 2020, and Rifkin is saying it could be 100 trillion by 2030 because of the nature of sensors, how small they'll be and how connected. So we'll be living literally in a digital environment. With if we think big data is big, the data of 2030 is cosmic, right? Um, uh, so again, I think the paradigm is distributed and participatory. He talks about, and we've talked, in the literature talks about the prosumer, the producer consumer. So I think for leadership, for the age of complexity, a hierarchy can no longer produce the requisite internal complexity of an organization in order to match its external environment. And in fact, the boundaries of organization are no longer, containable, So for me, the future of work is not about a person in job. It's about connecting the person best able. It's about assembling knowledge networks. So I phrase it as a McLuhan-esque term. Now, for McLuhan, the medium is anything that extends the body and mind and senses, and I think it's non-controversial to say that the internet has extended our mind and our senses, right? Especially as we start having senses that, are in our environment. And it's possible by 2030 that our children will actually feel the ocean because of the sensors in the ocean, right? But the message, so that's the medium. So if the digital environment is the medium, the message of that medium, and for McLuhan, the message is not the content. The message is the changes of behavior, the changes in pace, in scale, in pattern, in scope. So if the digital environment is the medium, the message of the medium is social computing. It's assembling knowledge networks. If knowledge lives in people, it's the ability to assemble the right people at the right time to do the right work, regardless of where they are. So that's a very different, it's no longer the architectures of machines. Now, the shadow of leadership, right? There was an interesting article that looked in the early 90s, the literature was all talking about management, but sort of coinciding with the rise of, I'm not sure if in the early 2000s, the Bush and sort of that sort of neoconservative, the language moved from management to leadership. Now, the shadow of the leader is the great decider, the intelligent designer who designs, decides, and everybody else does. Um, I think when we look at what's happening in the world of work, everything from Wikipedia, which is a social computing of the world's biggest encyclopedia, unprecedented. When we look at Fold It, the game that looks at that has about, I don't know, last time I looked, 75,000, probably more now, participants playing a game around, protein folding, that which is social computing. When we look at Uber, when we look at um, the open source movement, these are all instances of social computing. These are instances where there is no leader assigning work, telling people what to do. These are platforms where people engage in the pursuit through intrinsic motivation, which is what Valve is a wonderful example of. So even though Gabe Newell, the founder, has all these things he wants to get done, they don't get done unless people want to think they're important, right? Everybody at Valve knows what the deadlines are, where the shipping, what's being worked on, so that provides a context. Um, so the future of organization is much more distributed. It's much more what Gerard Fairlow calls based on responsible autonomy, a connected autonomy, or Barry Wellman, a Canadian sociologist who has looked at the difference between connected communities and wired communities and non-wired communities, and you know wired communities, people in wired communities that actually know more of their neighbors by name. They actually visit their neighbors' houses more often than people in non-wired communities. And so he has come up with a term that his recent book, Network, the New Social Operating System, networked individualism is the new social operating system. Individuals are now networked. And so when you look at responsible autonomy and networked individualism, these are like paradoxes. Connected autonomy, right? How can connected autonomy or networked individualism? So I'm a connected individual. I think these are the paradigms. Things are moving too fast, too complex, for us to depend on a leader. Personally, in in democracy, we don't elect leaders; we elect representatives. And here, I think the future of even democracy is more participatory. It won't be about, oh, I can get to vote online more often. No, it'll be about when our law is being written, it'll be written on a wiki and everyone can see it. And who's writing the law will be determined by citizen constituencies. It won't be just politicians or, their lawyers that are writing the laws. We'll see that it's the right blend of expertise, of stakeholders, of those involved that are actually writing the law, because you can't get the whole country, 35 or 36 or 40 million, but you can have those people watching and you can assemble the right forms of knowledge to write that law in a very transparent way. From local to federal, that participatory democracy, I think, is the new forms of governance that we need, right? So organizations need to be self-governed. They need to harness, recent studies are showing that 70% of workers are disengaged. 13% of workers are what you describe themselves as actively engaged. 13%. We need a workforce that harnesses, people's intrinsic motivation. And I don't think leadership, which again entails the decider, that the designer that tells, which ultimately tells people what to do, is no is sufficient in the future. So essentially, leaders have to get out of the way. They have to. Um, if we're thinking of a game platform, right? So think about the World of Warcraft, right? Now, to achieve quests that are necessary to progress, many quests can't be done alone. So you have to join a guild. And, in this guild, you can be a level 10 healer or a level 80, barbarian, right? Warrior. The level 80 warrior isn't the leader. The guild, in order to achieve a quest, has to, coordinate their activities and practice quite a bit. And each time, and leadership moves according to the context. So at some points, it's the healer that has to take charge and allocate resources and know what to do. What the level 80 warrior does is not provide supervision or leadership, but provides resources and skills. Right? Brings resources to bear to the quest at hand. And I think we need to create, so in that way, hierarchies of supervision and control have to become displaced by hierarchies of competence. Contextual based decisioning has to occur. And I call it decisioning because there isn't decision makers, there's decisioning processes that are based on these sort of inclusions of competencies, as opposed to the deference to what we think of as authority. Like Gabe Newell, founder of Valve, he is the founder who basically is a co-participant. We're seeing even like so there's Valve, and how did this co-founder of Valve do this? He's let given everybody the responsibility to figuring out where what they should do. Zappos is moving to a holacracy. So the leader at Zappos is, so you can look up holacracy, and I don't quite believe that it's the right solution, but it really is a very different form of governance of the organization. There's a company called Morningside, which is the biggest tomato processor in the States, basically has no managers. The work of Eleanor Ostrom indicates that a commons can be very well managed when people can talk, when they can set rules and rules about changing the rules. And I think there's a number, so Jimmy Wales, at Wikipedia, he's not the leader of Wikipedia, right? However, he does bring resources to bear. He stewards the situation, but he can't tell people what to do. And we see this in the open source movement quite a bit, So yes, Tim Berners-Lee is still sort of, a leader, but he's not like the boss in the traditional sense. The same thing with Linux. So I think there are real world demonstrations and experiments going on where leaders are not leaders in terms of the boss, but they are points of contacts, and what they do is steward and nurture, as opposed to decide and allocate.
Au revoir.